Hello, World History. This is Miss Corey. Welcome to Unit 6. Today we're going to be doing U6-L2 India Basics. So get ready because we're going to have a lot of vocab to get through. So if I talk a little bit faster than normal today, my apologies. But do let me know if you have any questions or need clarifications. Learning targets. Analyze the emergence, development, and impact of religions and philosophies of Hinduism and Buddhism. Later this week, you will be learning more about Hinduism and Buddhism, but I will cover it just a little bit today. As always, your job, watch this Edpuzzle. Any questions that are in blue text are going to be questions I want you to answer directly on the Edpuzzle. Anything in red text is going to be a vocab word, so make sure you write it down in your study guide. So first question, when you think of India, what do you think of? Yeah, there's quite a bit to think of because India is a huge country with a huge population. So here's a map of India. You can see that countries like Pakistan, China, Nepal, and Bangladesh border India. You can also see that it kind of juts out into the Indian Ocean. This is where it's located on the world map. You might think of cows because cows are very sacred. We'll talk about cows today. You might think of the population because it has an incredibly dense population. There is 1.4 billion people living in India. Compare that to 332 million in the United States. And then you might also think of like some of their rituals, such as like bathing in the Ganges. We'll talk about that today as well. You may think of monkeys at the temples. You might think of all the deities. We'll talk about them today as well. You might think of the Taj Mahal, or you might think of the most amazing, exciting, physically realistic Bollywood movies. All right, so let's talk about the geography of India because it has a very wide variety of geographic locations. So it is considered a subcontinent because it is physically separated from the rest of Asia. So although it is attached by land with the rest of Asia, if you look right here, these mountains are incredibly steep and they're almost impossible to pass. So that's why it's considered a subcontinent because you really can't get outside of India without going through these really treacherous mountains. Again, these are the Himalayan mountains, and also on the southern border, it's surrounded entirely by water, which is the Indian Ocean. So in the north, like we said before, it is mountainous with lots of forest. Here's a picture of what that looks like. So in the north is also the Great Basin, which is the start of the Indus and Ganges rivers. So here's a map. It kind of zooms in on this northern region. And that's where you can see the start of the two great rivers. So the first river is the Indus River. And that gives northern India and modern-day Pakistan water for drinking and agriculture in an otherwise very dry climate. So it really is a vital life source. Then you have the Ganges River. So the Ganges River is very sacred. It is actually seen as the goddess Ganga, and people bathe in it for religious purposes because it is thought to clean the soul. Now, there's a lot of controversy about that today because the Ganges River is super duper polluted. There's a lot of industries that just straight up dump their waste into the river, but people still bathe in it and they can get very, very sick. It's also holy, so people like to scatter the ashes of the dead in the river as well. And it is the main water source for major cities in India today. So in the middle of India, which is right here in this kind of green zone, it is dry, rocky, and it's called the Deccan Plateau. You can see a picture here. I mean, it looks very dry and very rocky. On the western coast, so right through here, it is tropical. And here's a picture of what that looks like. Then you also have monsoons. So India's weather is based around the dry and wet season, or called the monsoon season. So what happens with the monsoon season is that the cold air of the mountains and the warming water of the Indian Ocean create a ton of wind and rainstorms. And that typically happens between June and September each year. Get this, in a monsoon season, it can drop anywhere from 1.5 feet of rain to 32 feet of rain in like a matter of 3 months. That's insane. Also, farmers can have up to 3 crop harvests in 1 year there. So now let's go backwards in time. Let's talk about ancient India. So the first humans arrived in what we know today as India at about 63,000 BCE. The first civilizations pop up about 2500 BCE, and it was an agricultural civilization. So they grew things like wheat, barley, rice, and millet, which is a type of grain. You can see it right here. All right, let's talk about the first civilization that really popped up in the India area, and that was called the Harappan civilization. So this is also called the Indus civilization. It is over 100 ancient towns located in what is modern day Pakistan. So Pakistan used to be part of India. There's a long story about how they got separated, but we won't get into that today. And as you can see here in Pakistan, that's where archaeologists have found over 100 ancient towns. And it was first unearthed in 1921 in the city of Harappa, Pakistan. So that's why it's called the Harappan civilizations. And they lasted from about 2500 to 1700 BCE. And they actually believed in a matriarchal civilization. A matriarchal civilization is when power in families was passed down from mother to daughter. Today, we usually have patriarchal civilizations where it's from father to son, but they had matriarchal. So in the Harappan civilization, they also had a population estimate of all the towns combined would be about 23 to 35,000 people. Like we said before, they grew things like wheat, barley, mustard, sesame, peas, dates, and cotton. They also had domesticated animals such as cats, dogs, cattle, pigs, camels, and water buffalo. So not much is known about the civilizations besides the archaeological finds. So the Harappan civilizations had a writing system, but that's been lost to time. No one knows how to read it anymore. There's also iron statues of dancing girls, carts, animals, and chariots. This tells us that they had dances. They had modes of transportations, they had chariots for warfare, and they even had the technology for iron smelting. Some of the other archaeological finds include seals. So when you think of seals, right, like you think of like, oh, like I need to seal something closed. Yeah, it's very similar. But what it is seals are really more of like a symbol that a family or a person has. So for example, here, this person had a seal of some sort of, looks like cow or ox maybe. And they would stamp that into fresh clay to show someone's signature. Seals were also made out of, or seals were made out of soapstone and carved with a copper cutting tool. So we also know that they had the smelting technology for copper as well. So there is also jewelry that has been uncovered in the Harappan civilizations. And that jewelry includes lapis lazuli, turquoise, and jade have been found in Harappa, but these minerals aren't found in modern day Pakistan. So here's another question for you. What does the presence of these minerals tell us? Take your best educated guess. Yeah, the Harappan civilization people, they traded with others. So they mostly traded with Iran and Iraq for turquoise and lapis lazuli. And they also traded as far away as China for jade. All right, let's go on to the next phase of ancient India. So after the Harappan civilizations, we get into the Vedic age. That's from 1500 to 500 BCE. It is named after Vedas. Vedas are religious texts that are the main source of information for this age. What they are is they're a collection of thousands of poetic hymns to different Hindu gods. We'll talk about Hinduism too in just a few slides from now. So the neat part of it is that these hymns were originally passed down orally, so by word of mouth. But some people were really smart and forward thinking, and they actually started to write down those hymns in about 1500 BCE. And here's an example of what those hymns would look like. So, the really interesting thing about the Vedic age is that this group of people were not related to the Harappan people. Okay, they were not descendants from them. The Vedic people were Indo European people, and those are people who come from Europe and Western Asia. So the Vedic people migrated from Europe to the Middle East, or Europe and Middle East to Northwest India in about 1500 BCE. So they would come again from Europe, parts of the Middle East, and they'd go all the way to India. Okay. So they spoke Indo-European languages. So those are going to be languages that come from Europe and Southwest Asia. So the Vedic people were mostly herders. They raised cattle. Cattle became super important role in their society. Like you can see here in this picture. So this cow is, has flowers and it has paint and is being worshipped. And that may be why some Indians see cattle as sacred today. In about 1000 BCE, the Vedic people would travel up to the Ganges Plain in northeast India, and there they would use iron plows attached to oxen to plow fields, kind of like what's happening here in this picture. So there was constant conflict between two groups of people during the Vedic age. These two groups of people were called the Aryans and the Dasas. So there are a ton of stories of these conflicts. But the really tricky part is that these conflicts were not written down on paper until generations after the conflicts happened. So, as you can imagine, the stories were passed down through the generations orally by word of mouth. So, it is very unknown to historians what exactly is true in these stories and what is fake. So, the Aryans, they were light skinned people from Indo European area, and they also spoke the Indo-European languages. And Dasas were seen as darker skinned natives, so not from Europe or the Middle East, and they were people who spoke the Dravidian language. So Aryans pushed the Dasas into the less fertile southern regions of India. So the Aryans would come up here, they would move across the mountain range, they would clash with the Dasas and make the Dasas move down towards the southern part of India. And this also introduced the patriarchal society to India, where the power of the family is passed from father to son. So over time, the color of one's skin, or varna in India, influenced the creation of something called the caste systems. So the caste system, that is a hierarchy of people in society. In India, the caste system is called jati, and we'll dive more deeply into this. Your videos this week, too, will also dive a little bit more deeper into it. So, at the very top of the caste system, so like these are like the best of the best people according to India's caste system, are the Brahmins, and they are the priests and academics. Below them is the Kshatriyas, which are the rulers, administrators, and warriors. Below them are the Vaishyas, which are the artisans, tradesmen, farmers, and merchants. And then below them are the Shudras, which are the manual laborers. And at the very, very, very bottom are the Dalits. So Dalitas comes from the word Dasas, and that was the name of the native tribe that the Aryans kicked out, and it means slave. So, in English terms, this caste may be called the untouchables. So, they get the worst of the worst jobs in society in India. And they are literally called the untouchables because it's like for any of these caste systems touch a Dalit would be like horrendous. and that their jobs include like street cleaners, doing just menial tasks like tanning hides of animals, touching the ashes of the cremated, or disposing of dead animals. So the tricky part of the caste system is that you can never move up. The person was born into their caste. You cannot move caste, and you must marry within your own caste. You may only eat with other people in your own caste. And if a higher caste person touches a lower caste person, they would have to do some sort of purification ritual because the higher class person would be seen as like tainted or dirty after touching the lower caste person. So, the kind of good news is that discrimination in the caste system was made illegal in 1950. So, like 4 years ago? So, socially, caste system is still used today, though. Although it's not legally used today, people still follow it. So a person is born into their caste, and through reincarnation, which is rebirth, if that person did good in their previous life, so if they had positive karma, they could be reborn into an upper caste. That was the only way you can move up in the caste system is if you do well and then you die and then you get reborn. So you're going to learn more about Hinduism later this week. So Hinduism is a polytheistic religion, meaning that there are multiple gods, and it started about 2000 BCE. Today, it has 900 million followers. And the kind of tricky part of Hinduism is not just one solid religion, but it's many similar religions overlapping. My big example of that would be like Hindus believe in some of the most major gods, but each region may have their own local deity or god or way of worshiping. So Hindus believe all living things have Atman, or a soul. And through rebirth or reincarnation, a soul can move up the hierarchy of life. So once a soul has done enough good things, which is dharma, they can reach moksha, or salvation. And moksha means breaking the cycle of rebirth, and the soul can finally be at peace. The video that you'll watch later this week will also talk about that. So Hindus believe that the cow is a sacred animal, so it cannot be killed or eaten. That's why cows roam the streets of India with no disturbance, and that still happens today. So most Hindus are vegetarian and do not eat pork or beef. And there is not just one holy book for Hinduism. So the Vedas, which we talked about before, those are the poems to the gods. They're the main holy texts, but there's a bunch of different ones. So there are 7 big gods that are worshipped throughout the Hindu peoples. The first one is Brahma. He is the god responsible for the creation of the world and all living things. Vishnu, the god that preserves and protects the universe. And it comes back to help Earth through incarnations, which are also called avatars. And no, I'm not talking about the blue people. So in other words, Vishnu takes many forms and shapes. And then Shiva, that was the god that destroys the universe in order to recreate it. And then there's 4 more down here as well, but I won't go through them. So again, here's some statues of what all of these 7 gods look like. Well, that's a painting, I suppose. All right, get ready because I'm going to speed through the next 2 Indian empires fairly fast. So the first one we're going to talk about is the Mauryan Empire. So if you look actually over here on this map, you can see this blue area right here is the Mauryan Empire. So it covers pretty much all of India. So they were from 324 to 184 BCE. And this is India's first centralized empire, meaning that the majority of India would be united under one government. And it was really known for its high taxes on its people. So much as a fourth of a farmer's harvest went straight to the government as a tax. So I know today taxes we pay it in money, but in ancient times and across the world, sometimes taxes are actually paid in goods instead of just money. But the good news about higher taxes is that the government had a very well-maintained military. So they had things like the infantry, cavalry, chariots, and war elephants. So the government monopolized on tolls, which are fees on trade routes, also metal mines, alcohol, and the manufacturing of weapons. And during this time, women could own and inherit property. So there are two very major epics or long stories written in the empire. They're called the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. So the video that you watch tomorrow will be talk a little bit more about the Mahabharata, but this is the definition I pulled from worldhistory.org because I honestly could not even shorten this definition. So it says the Mahabharata is an ancient Indian epic where the main story revolves around two branches of a family, the Pandavas and the Kauravas, who, in the Kurukshetra war, battled for the throne of Hastinapura. Interwoven into this narrative are several smaller stories about people dead or living in philosophical discourses. Whew, so it's very complicated. But again, the video tomorrow will talk more about it. Then we have the Gupta Empire. So if you look at the smaller map, the Gupta Empire is going to be more of this lighter shade right here on more the northern half of India. So they were from 320 to 550 CE, and they expanded and maintained trade routes. They also focus on agriculture in the Ganges Plain. During this time is when women lost a lot of their rights. So society moved towards a total patriarchal society. So women could no longer own or inherit property, and all business and wealth were controlled solely by men. They also could not study sacred texts, so they could not read the Vedas for themselves. They could not sacrifice animals, and girls would be married at 6 or 7 years old. So, what would happen is that they would go off and live with their new husbands, and the future husband would raise the girl himself to be the way that he wanted her to be. And girls also had to obey their fathers. When they got slightly older, they had to obey their husbands, and if their husband died, then they would have to obey their sons. So women were also expected to perform something called sati, which if her husband died, what she would have to do is so her husband's body would lay on top of wood, kind of like you see right here, or other burnable material, ready to get burned or kind of cremated. And what would happen is she would have to sit on top of his body and burn herself to death with his body. Even though if she's alive and healthy, she would still have to do that. And if a woman didn't do so, she would be shunned by society. But to be honest, I'd rather be shunned than burnt to death with a husband who chose me when I was 6 years old. All right, so also with the Gupta Empire, this is when Arabic numerals were popular. So they're the number system that we use today. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 0. That came from the age of the Gupta Empire. They also invented zero, which seems kind of like today, like, oh, duh, it's just zero, right? But zero is kind of an interesting concept, right? Because it is actually a placeholder for larger numbers. And they also created math based on tens, which is what we also use today, right? 10, 20, 30, 40. And then it goes on to like ones, tens, hundreds, thousands, 10,000s, 100,000s, millions. But eventually the Arabs, which are the Muslims, which we'll talk about later next week, used these numerals too. And they then taught it to the Europeans. The Europeans loved the simplicity of the number system, and that's why we use it today. So it went from India to the Arab countries, then to Europe, and then of course Europe came over to North America, and that's why we use the number symbols today. So you'll learn more about Buddhism and Hinduism later this week in the videos you'll watch. There are a couple other religions that are important in India that I don't really get time to touch on. The first one is Jainism, and that is a major-ish religion in India. There's about 5 million people who practice it today. It is also polytheistic, and they believe in reincarnation. In Jainism, they also believe one needs to meditate in order to break reincarnation. They also believe all animals have a life source, and they are extremely nonviolent. So much so that they wear masks and sweep floor to not inhale or step on any bugs. Some followers only eat what they are given, and they may also practice nudity. Then the other one is Sikhism. So this was founded in 1400 CE. It is monotheistic, but it is not the same Abrahamic God that Christian Jews and Muslims believe in. It's a completely separate religion. There are about 30 million followers today, and it was founded by Nanak after he believed God spoke to him. So someone in Sikhism believes in becoming one with God, but working hard and sharing with others as well. The Adi Granth is their holy book, and it contains nearly 6,000 hymns or songs praising God. It was written by Nanak and other gurus meaning teachers. And most people who follow Sikhism do not drink alcohol, do tobacco, or drugs. And men cannot cut their hair. They must kind of tuck it in and cover it with a turban, like you see in this picture here. Ah, yes, you survived, and we barely even scratched the surface of India's history. So today, let's wrap this up. We learned about some subcontinent, Indus and Ganges River, monsoons, Harappan civilizations, Vedas, Indo-Europeans, Aryans, caste, patriarchal, matriarchal, Mahabharata, Hinduism, Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, Jainism, and Sikhism. Next up, you're going to watch U6-L3, What is Hinduism? So on this Edpuzzle, you are going to answer 5 questions on the video that are multiple choice. I will be grading them on what you get right or wrong. There's also some vocab words on that video. I pause the video when those vocab words come up. So make sure that you put the definitions to those vocab words into the study guide. Okay, so it's a little bit different than what we usually do. And it's going to be the same thing with U6-L4, What is Buddhism? It's going to be the same process. And then you're going to watch U6-L5 Edpuzzle, The Basics of Islam and what it has to do with India. And that's one of my Edpuzzles. So if you have any questions or you want to learn more, please let me know. I'm more than happy to help you out. Thanks for watching. Bye.